softened, they lost their strength, and down it comes. The whole thing about whether it fell at free fall speed or not, I don't know why a building would not fall in that manner. I mean, why is there an assumption that a building that's lost its structural strength, that's got fires raging in it, it suffers a catastrophic collapse? Why would that not resemble a controlled demolition? Is there any reason why it shouldn't? I mean, it's, you know, it's had all its sections shattered, just like the video that Steve showed us of that building where the top section was you used a particular French term for it, didn't you? Vernage. Yeah? Vernage. To me, you know, did very much resemble what happens. But why shouldn't it happen? You know, why is there this great distinction between the two? I'll take questions afterwards. Yeah, I don't understand that one. So that's World Trade 7. That's free fall, and that's the whole thing about steel and what happens to steel when you heat it. I know there's a very, very strong argument that I've encountered on lots of the sites advocating controlled demolition that say, well, those fires weren't burning hot enough. They couldn't even reach 1,000 degrees. And the signature of that is that the smoke that was coming out of those buildings was a very dark, thick, black smoke. Yeah? And that is what's called an oxygen-deprived fire. That's the case being made by the controlled demolition advocates. They're saying, no way would you see that kind of smoke if you had fire temperatures at 1,000 degrees. But that's not actually true, because there are other reasons why you might see thick, dark, black smoke. It's because it's burning hydrocarbons, which sounds incredibly, you know, technical, but all it means is the plastic in the building is burning. If you've ever seen like a tire burning, or if you've seen you know, sheets of plastic that are set on fire, they give off this very, very dark, acrid smoke. And the other argument is that you can't get a fire up to 1,000 degrees temperature because oxygen can't get to it. Now, that's not actually true for those buildings, because they had holes smashed in the side of them, including World Trade Center 7, because it was hit by debris, tore the south facade off it. Oxygen can get in and it can feed those fires. The reason why you see dark black smoke is simply because there are hydrocarbons burning. Now, I said earlier that I researched all that and I found that relatively easy to find what the debunking case was, and finding sort of scientific verification for those debunking cases in peer-reviewed, respected journals that, you know, architects across the world and structural engineers across the world will all go, that's a reliable scientific journal. The one that absolutely stumped me, literally this morning, I actually rang the New Internationalist, didn't I? And said, look, I think I'm going to have to admit defeat on this one, because I've started looking into thermite, which, you know, wasn't something that I was particularly familiar with until this morning. Excuse me having such a dry mouth, but I do feel quite nervous saying all this. I started looking into thermite this morning and came across Stephen Jones's paper saying that there were thermite residual particles found in the World Trade Center dust. I started looking around, trying to sort of find information that might show you the opposite side, so saying, well, no, they haven't. I tried to find stuff about, well, it wasn't peer-reviewed, you know, it's just his opinion, other scientists haven't looked at it. But apparently it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. That's when I got absolutely stumped, and I thought, my God, what is going to happen here? Am I going to end up sort of coming to this debate and sort of saying, oh my God, you know, I'm going to have to concede this one? But then something really, really strange happened. I started hunting around for stuff about Stephen Jones, who's the only scientist who says that he's found these thermite particles. Nobody else has confirmed it. It's only Stephen Jones saying that. And no matter how many of the sort of controlled demolition sites you go on, you'll find people just citing him. There aren't any other structural engineers or scientists, qualified people, saying this. It's only Stephen Jones saying it. And the only place he's published it is what's called an open peer-reviewed journal. Now, an open peer-reviewed journal is not the same as conventional scientific journals, where you submit your paper, and then that journal charges a fee for people who want to know the technical details of what scientists are publishing in their field. You have to pay for that journal. This is a journal where you, as the scientist, have to pay to have your papers published, which is the complete opposite of how it's normally done. And this particular journal was called the Open Chemical Physics Journal. Okay, now, the strange thing about it is it doesn't publish many articles. It publishes about 4 articles a year in 2009. And a scientist called Kent Anderson, who works for the New England Journal of Medicine, he decided to sort of test how strong the peer review on this particular magazine was, which again is the only magazine that Stephen Jones ever published in. And he submitted a paper that was written by a computer program that specializes in producing kind of gibberish articles. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the SoCal affair, where it was used to submit a spoof, what's it called, postmodernist article to nothing to do with science. Postmodernism is like a humanities theory. This will generate text for you, gibberish text like, for instance, this is a direct quote from the article that they submitted, that Kent Anderson submitted to this particular journal. It said, "We discuss existing research into red-black trees, vacuum trees, and courseware." Yeah? This was what the computer generated. It were kind of like little footnotes to go with it, and so on and so forth. He used a fake name, which any sort of respectable scientific journal should check the names of the people submitting to see whether they actually really are scientists. I've checked Kent Anderson, he is actually a real scientist, he does actually work for the New England Journal of Medicine. And the craziest thing they did was they had to sort of say which organisation they worked with as scientists. So they submitted something saying the Centre for Research in Applied Phrenology. Oh, you got there before me. I was so looking forward to delivering the punchline. So, you know, they submitted this paper, and they got a letter back from the editors of this journal, which is the only journal that's saying there were nanothermite particles found in the dust, saying, "Thank you very much for this. This is brilliant. We've had it peer reviewed. Yeah, and we're willing to publish this now. Can you send 800 quid to a United Arab Emirates bank account, and then we'll publish your article?" That's the point where they withdrew. So the only evidence for thermite, which is the only thing that's going to actually cut the towers down without making massive loud explosions that everybody can hear, and I will come on to the evidence of people hearing explosions in a second, is really an utterly discredited journal. So that to me was a really, really interesting experience. I was suddenly thinking, oh my God, you know, like, I'm going to have to come to this meeting and go, hands up, I can't explain thermite. But when you really carefully check what the other side is saying, you actually find that a lot of, I'm trying not to use the word conspiracy theories, but you find that they do collapse when you start looking at the other side. You have to completely rigorously look at both sides and check the facts, check that this one source that's quoted everywhere is actually a reliable one. And I can't find anybody else who's found thermite residues in the dust. It's only Stephen Jones who says it. He also published another science paper about how Jesus, when he came back from the dead, went to live in America and met the Native Americans. So, as a reliable scientist, I find Jones a very, very difficult character. I'm hoping that's covered most of the kind of technical stuff. There are things about how, you know, it's the first time a steel frame building has ever collapsed due to fire, and this is very, very strongly used as an argument for controlled demolition, but it's not actually true. There are things like, people keep citing the Windsor, how many times?
5 minutes.
Ah, damn. Okay. People cite the Windsor Tower in Madrid as an example of something that burned for ages, a steel frame building that burned for ages but didn't collapse. But it's much, much smaller than the Twin Trade Towers or even Building 7. It's only 347 foot high, which means it weighs much, much less. It's built in a completely different way with reinforced concrete sections, completely different to the structure of the 3 buildings that are cited as evidence of controlled demolition. And it did suffer a partial collapse in the sections that only had steel girders supporting the weight. So the bits that were just steel did collapse in the heat because the steel softened. But the rest of it didn't because it was built in a completely different way. There are several other buildings, the McCormick Center in Chicago, Sight and Sound Theater in Pennsylvania, there's a toy factory, I think it's a Kandar toy factory. They all were steel frame buildings that did actually collapse as a result of fire. So that one doesn't really work as an argument. Steve said that common sense is also an argument that you can use. You don't necessarily have to understand a lot of technical stuff about fireproofing and about stress on steel beams and so on. There are very practical reasons for sort of saying this isn't very likely. If somebody had organised a controlled demolition, the first priority is you've got to get away with it. If you were found out, it wouldn't just damage Bush's reputation and that particular administration. It would bring down the neocon system and possibly even American democracy for decades to come. It would just be extraordinary, the amount of damage it would do. So you definitely want to get away with this. Why wouldn't it be sufficient if the argument is to take people into a war, and a war that we all know was unjustified? That is one thing I hope we all do agree about in this room. Why wouldn't two huge airplanes smashing into the Twin Trade Towers, gigantic fireballs, 200 people leaping to their deaths, hundreds of other people being killed by being in the planes and by being in the wrong place in the building? Why wouldn't that be enough on its own to make people really angry and to start making irrational decisions like backing an unjustified war? Why wouldn't that have been enough? Why do you need to do a controlled demolition? Why can't the two towers still stand, smoking, possibly for days, and then probably having to be demolished by actually a controlled demolition to get rid of them, because you can't rebuild them? Why then risk blowing up World Trade Center 7 as well, That wouldn't just be a smoking gun, that is you shooting yourself in the bollocks by doing that. That is a ridiculous thing to do. I mean, they must have thought that every structural engineer in the world would have looked at that and gone, no fucking way. Like it wasn't even hit by a plane. Why take that risk? If it's to get rid of a CIA field center, or it's to get rid of the control mechanism for the demolition things, well, why not just move them out in cardboard boxes the next day? It's ideal, it's utter chaos. If you can get a load of explosive charges into the World Trade Center buildings and get away with that, surely you can just sort of take some stuff out of the building. There's no need to demolish it to remove the evidence of a CIA field center. If it's documents that you want to destroy, buy out big industrial documents. Why then attack the Pentagon? Why attack the Pentagon without a plane? Why fire a missile at it? I mean, you're just asking to be caught if you do that. If these people really are these Machiavellian bastards who killed 3,000 of their own citizens, and like just had super kind of evil powers of controlling everything, why fuck it up like that by having a missile instead of a plane? It's just going to be so obvious. So to me, that means that I just don't think they would have taken the risk.
We've got 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, it's very difficult to know where to sum up. I suppose what I'd say is I tried to sort of say earlier, I had this strange experience with looking into the Thermite stuff, and I had that moment of kind of, I'm going to lose this argument. I have to change my mind now. I think everybody really needs to ask themselves the question, under what circumstances would you stop supporting the conventional explanation of the Twin Trade Towers, but also under what circumstances and what kind of evidence would you need to hear to stop you supporting the idea that it was actually an inside job?